Alexander on December 3rd, 2003 regarding his experiences in World War II. Okay, and what we'd just like to start off with is prior to going into the service, were you in school? Were you working? At what point in your life were you before things got started?
Yeah. All right. I was a freshman at the University of Georgia. I spent 1 year there before I was drafted. And my intention was to get into the Army Specialized Training Program, which was a college program for people going in the Army. But to start with, you had to go through regular basic training. So I was drafted and went through the basic training, which is the training that all ground forces have to go through with. You learn to crawl under the machine guns and shoot rifles and big guns and that sort of thing. I was actually assigned to armored basic training, that is, to learn tank driving, tank tactics, and that sort of thing. The most significant part of my experience was later on in combat in Europe. I was in the Battle of the Bulge, and of course that was a real fantastic battle, and quite a few hardships and that sort of thing. But I'll lead up to that, but how I got to that particular point. Since I had applied for this Army Specialized Training Program, which they call ASTP, there were a lot of them in my basic training unit that had applied for it, and also some had applied for OCS. And in our files, we were segregated. Our IQ was a little bit higher than the average, but in order to qualify for those particular programs. So in the files, we were sort of segregated a little bit different. So when we finished basic training,
now where was your basic training?
At Fort Knox, Kentucky. When we finished basic training, everyone was to be sent out as replacement to other tank outfits. But those of us that had been set up for ASTP and OCS were not sent out. But at that point, they had abolished those programs. They anticipated so many casualties in Europe that they wanted all the men they could get over there, so they wasn't going to let them go to college and that sort of thing. So everybody else in the company were sent out as replacements in line units, but they decided to create a separate tank company for us. They were experimenting with a big heavy tank that the armored school had already turned down, and I guess somebody with influence had an interest in it, and they wanted to try again to determine that this tank was useful. So they created this separate tank company, and those of us that had been designated for college training in OCS were put in that company along with some cadre from the armored school who had been training tank soldiers for years. They were real specialists. A lot of them had been mechanics in civilian life and were very well trained. So we experimented with that tank for about 6 months, I guess, and we came to the same conclusion that the armored school did. It wasn't practical for combat. It was just too big and heavy. So they broke up this company. And by that time, of course, the ones that had come from the armored school already had high ratings. They were sergeants, master sergeants, that sort of thing. But those of us that had come in had gotten some promotions too. I was a corporal at that time, and they sent us to the infantry. Now, the ones that was in our basic training union, they sent them to a tank outfit. But they sent us to the infantry because when they sent a bunch of soldiers that had ratings like we did to another outfit, that kind of fills up the rating so that this new outfit could not promote some of their people. And there was a lot of resentment about us coming in there. They also had people that had washed out in the Air Force, had been training for Air Force. They gave them a buck sergeant rating and sent them in there. So they were trying to, every way in the world, to break us back to private so they would be able to advance these. And a lot of well-experienced, high-ranking NCOs were busted to private. And my first sergeant showed me an order that he was sending down to have me busted. But before that went through, the Inspector General got a hold of it and stopped all of that. So I wound up going overseas with this infantry unit as a corporal. And I hadn't had a lot of infantry training in a line company. I had infantry training and basic training, but it's not the same thing. So they tried, since I had a corporal rating, they had me work as a squad leader at times, and so it was in an area that I hadn't had a lot of experience, so it was a sort of a stressful situation.
No, at what point did you go over? What year was that?
It was 1944.
Okay.
It was in October '44. So when we got into combat, and it's right ironic, but most of those experienced soldiers from this division that we were in were some of the early casualties. So a lot of those of us that had come into the outfit moved up in rank pretty fast because of the casualties. I became a staff sergeant very quickly and was a squad leader for a long time, and then because of more casualties, I wound up being a platoon sergeant. So I had a lot of responsibility, and without having a lot of the training that most of these people had had. We first went into battle down in southern France on Metz in the Sarre Basin. In fact, we pushed into Germany for a short time there. And while we were down there, it's when the Belgian Bulge broke out. And of course, we didn't know what it was. We just knew that they were pulling us out of the line and sending us somewhere else. So they loaded us in trucks and sent us north. And we found out later, of course, that we were going up there to push the Bulge back. We were assigned to Patton's Third Army. And we were getting in, you might say, the tail end of the Bulge because we were beginning to push it back. The Bulge had broken out and most of the damage had been done, so we were in the position of pushing him back. And the bad thing about that whole thing was the poor intelligence on part of the U.S. Army. The top generals felt that the Germans didn't have the capacity to do any real damage up there. So they had the lines pretty loose up there, didn't have too many troops. And the ones that they had were very green. For example, one of the divisions that was on the line was a brand new division that had just come over from the States. A lot of those were people that had been in this ASTP program and were assigned into this division. And they had been, in other words, a few weeks earlier, they had been sitting in college classes, and also with new draftees. So you had soldiers that had never been in combat. They had, of course, had basic training. They had learned to use a gun, but had never been really tested as far as combat, even in training. And they were spread out very thin along this line. And of course, the Germans were aware of that, and they would just push right on through there. And so when we came up to push them back, we ran into a lot of those guys that had been had come in there and gotten in the beginning of the Bulge, and I had talked to a lot of them. Some of them had said that they were in a classroom just a few weeks before all that happened, and they got up there and just really didn't know what to do. So then the worst thing about that, as far as personal problems is concerned, was with the weather. They said it was the coldest winter in many years there. The temperature was down to 0 with snow on the ground. And this is another problem of the Army. They didn't have winter equipment for us. We just had normal shoes and uniforms that we normally wore. And we were having to sleep on the ground and in that heavy snow. In fact, my feet got frozen, and they weren't bad enough to be evacuated, but whenever I got them warm, for example, if we were on the march and we stopped and went into some houses, when the heat hit them, they started aching so bad I had to go back outside. At night, I usually had to sleep with my feet out from under the cover, because as soon as they would get warm, they would ache. So the bad part about it was the conditions, the weather, and that sort of thing. But then we continued to work and push the Germans on back. I'll give you another example. By that time, I was a squad leader, and we were in a holding position at Luxembourg, and there was a lot of snow on the ground and all. And we were in a situation where we were under fire from the Germans during the daytime from our artillery on the side of a mountain, and we had to stay down in the foxholes. At night, we would get up and go over the hill to get our supper. The cooks would bring it up to us and that sort of thing. And we'd get a hot meal then, and they would give us a ration, and we'd get a hot breakfast the next morning. We had to do all this in the dark, because as soon as it got light, the Germans would be ready to open up on us. And so we they would give us at breakfast time, they would give us a K ration to eat for lunch. Then we'd have to go back over the hill and stay in the foxhole all that day until the next night. But I had a replacement assigned to my squad, and he came up to me and said he'd been in that foxhole one day, and he told me, he says, "Sergeant, says I'm suffering from asthma, and I'm just about to die up in that foxhole. And if I'm up there another day, I won't be able to survive." And said, "Can you do anything about it?" So I talked to the first sergeant, and they were able to move him out. Later on, he was sent back behind the lines, and later on he was coming up. No, as he was going back, he ran into some guys from my outfit, and he was telling them, he said, "If it hadn't been for Sergeant Alexander, I'd be dead now." And so you had a lot of situations like that. And again, some of these guys that were sent up there, replacement, had just had been in this ASTP program. I had one of them tell me that he was given a 3-day pass to go home and then shipped overseas and from this college classroom. So that was a situation that was going on there. And then we finally pushed the Bulge back, and Patton's Army did a tremendous job on that, and they didn't get much credit for it. The press was talking about General Montgomery from England, giving him credit for most of this, and a lot of that is in this book that I have here. So that was generally the situation. Mostly, the hardship, the cold weather, and of course there were casualties. And I remember in one case, one of the toughest battles we had was we were trying to push the Germans out of a town. They were pushing us back. We were going back and forth. And a couple of companies from my battalion had moved out beyond us. And they had the snow for the first time, and they got hold of some sheets and improvised a white uniform. And they came back in where we were, and we started shooting at them because we had never seen anybody with white uniforms. And they were yelling that they were Americans, and the Germans were shooting at them from the rear, and we were shooting at them from the front. So we had to quiz them and ask them questions about the United States to make sure that they were legitimate, and got them in. We had, and that was about the time when the Germans had sent a lot of English-speaking Germans with American uniforms over, and would they disrupted the traffic. They would change signs, location signs, and things of that nature. So we heard that there were Germans in American uniforms, and so we didn't trust anybody. We had to be very careful. I remember going back and seeing where some of our people had captured some of those Germans that were that had American uniforms on, and they had them sitting up on the hood of a Jeep, and they took the shoes from them and all that, and all this cold weather and that sort of thing. They took a lot of their uniform stuff off. So that was a thing you just couldn't trust anybody. You just didn't know what the situation was. We had going into this place that I was just talking about, where we fired at these people. Before that, we had gone in to try to take this town. My company did, and the Germans overwhelmed us, and we lost a lot of people. We went in with a full company of about 140 people, and we came out of it with about 28 people. The rest of them were either wounded or captured, that sort of thing. And then we tried to get orders to retreat, to leave there, because the Germans were still in there. But the orders came back that anybody that retreated from that would be court-martialed. So we had to go back in and fight again. But they did give us a platoon of tanks to go in, and we, although those tanks were knocked out very, very rapidly, we finally came in and got control of the town. And we stayed in that town for a while, being knocked out, and then knocked the Germans out, back and forth.
What do you remember the name of the town?
I want to say it started with an A, but one of the towns close to it was Prayon P. I've got it in this book. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, I can't read it. It's small print. Can you read that?
Okay.
I meant to bring a magnifying glass
That
on.
is tiny. No, it starts with an A, and that's all I can make out.
Yeah.
Class alone.
But that was one of the toughest one. It's in this thing somewhere. I'm trying to see if I see it.
Now, is this a book that your group put together? I'm just,
No.
or
This is about the 87th Infantry Division. It was compiled professionally, and
well, that's what it looks like. It's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
what a
and it's divided into regiments. So there's a section here on my regiment, which is the 347th. See, this is pictures of captured German prisoners in the snow, and you can see, you can get an idea of the weather conditions and that sort of thing from this. And there's some charts of some of the battle operations. Let's see if I.
What we may do towards the end is actually have you hold up. So we'll hold up some of those to the camera.
Right.
Towards the end, and because that's some.
That was actually compiled by the Army, wasn't it?
What?
I think the Army compiled that book, didn't it?
It's not the Army officially, but some group did, and then of course they sold it to us, and we had to pay for it. On the front of it, they've got the route that we took. We landed at Le Havre, France, and then these arrows show where we were going. And the first time, our first infantry attack was in this Sarrebrucken area, southern France, in Metz right here. That's the first time the division was entered in combat. And here's where we crossed the German border. And then the arrows turn around, and that's where we're going back up to help on the Bulge. And it shows us going up to Bastogne. You may have heard this. Bastogne was the town where the 101st Airborne Division was surrounded and almost wiped out there. And so this shows our route. And then after most of the fighting was over, then the division I was wounded by this time was back in England, and then the division was sent right on over to Czechoslovakia. So this gives us a little bit of a history of how we.
Mm-hmm. Now, at what point were you wounded?
I was right on the Rhine River after the worst of the fighting was over. In fact, I would get letters from some of my buddies while I was in the hospital, and they was telling me about how much fun they were having on the Autobahns and driving through there and all that stuff. But I was sleeping on clean sheets and that sort of thing, so I didn't have any complaints. It first time I'd been able to sleep on a nice bed and all that.
Do you want to give a little bit of information about like how you were wounded, what led up to what situation you were in when you were wounded? And
yeah, we had pushed into the Rhine River one night, and the Germans were trying to get a lot of equipment across the Rhine. So there was a lot of real heavy fighting going on there, but by daytime they had all gotten across and there was no more fighting. And so we went down to the river where they had left a lot of their equipment and all that sort of stuff, and we were going through the trucks and all that. Some of the guys were riding motorcycles up and down the roads over there, and I was gathering souvenirs when I was wounded. So after all that fighting, I was wounded by collecting souvenirs, but a sniper had gotten me from across the river. I was shot in the knee, and we called a leg wound $1 million wound because it meant you'd be evacuated and you wouldn't be sent back because you couldn't fight with a bullet in your leg. So we always look forward to a wound like that because we get to go into a hospital and sleep on clean seats. I remember one time I had a guy in my squad who was a very malcontent person, just always complaining. And I went to relieve him from an outpost duty one time, and he was laying on his back with his leg up in the air like this. I said, "What are you trying to do?" He says, "I'm sticking my leg up so maybe a German would shoot it and I would be evacuated." That's the kind of extremes that they would go to.
When you were injured, where were you taken? Where were you?
I was taken into a field hospital there, and they did the preliminary operation, I guess, and then I was flown back to England, and I was in a general hospital in England until I was able to get out, and then I was in a recuperation center for a while in England. And
What part of England was that?
you know, I don't even know where I was. We got some weekend passes, and I went to some of the towns, but I can't. I remember one time I went to Stratford-on-Avon. I was close to that, but I'm not familiar really with where I was then. then I was shot full of luck in my Army service. Number one, I was fortunate to get out of the tank outfit, because one thing I saw when I got in combat, those tanks went up in flames, and a lot of people were burned and all. So you could take care of yourself out on the ground a lot better than you could all cooped up in a tank. So although there was a lot of bad conditions, I would much prefer to be on the ground in the infantry than being cooped up in that tank. So I felt I was lucky from that standpoint. And then when after I was wounded, and that's another thing, getting wounded in the leg, which sent me back to the hospital, all was another stroke of luck. And then when the war was over, the chances are that it would be quite a while before I got back to the States. But I was assigned to a general hospital unit. I was in limited service. So instead of going back to the infantry unit, I was assigned to this general hospital unit. And it was scheduled to ship to the Pacific. See, the Pacific War was still going on. So I came back on the same ship I went over on, which was Queen Elizabeth. And when we docked in New York, they had announced that the Japanese were surrendering. And see, we were on the way to the Pacific over there, so we was glad to know that. And they sent everybody to the base closest to the home for a 30-day furlough before they were shipped to the Pacific. And so I was sent to Fort McPherson here in Atlanta. And the day that I got to Fort Mac was the day that they celebrated the Japanese surrender. So I was able to walk up and down Peachtree Street with my girlfriend, who I later married, and so we enjoyed the celebration with all of that. So that's another lucky street. If it hadn't been for that, I would have been over in Europe for a long time before I got discharged. And of course, if it had been a little bit earlier, or if the war was still going on, I'd be over fighting in the Pacific, or being over there.
How was the communication back home? Did you have much opportunity for communication with your family
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. I had written a letter to both my mother and my girlfriend to tell them that I had been wounded, and my mother got the letter from me, and I was telling them how fortunate it was and how nice it was to have a nice bed to sleep in and all, and I was really happy about it. And my letter to my mother got to her before she was notified by the War Department that I'd been wounded. And back then, they sent telegrams, Western Union, and the only people they had to deliver telegrams were old men. And she said this old man came up to the door with a telegram and says, "Lady, I'm sure sorry to bring you this telegram." And she's just very smiled. She said, "Oh, that's all right. I already heard, so I'm glad to get it." So he was afraid he was going to get her upset because I had been wounded, but she had already heard. So the communications was very good. I meant to bring a sample of it. We had what we call V-mail, which we would write the letter and they would microfilm it and reduce it and put it on film, and they could ship thousands of letters over just on one reel of film, and then they would reproduce it when it got over here. And so what they would get would be a little bit small thing, but at least it was fast communication. I got packages, cakes and cookies. My mother knew that my favorite dish was, what did we have to eat today? Brunswick stew. My memory's getting bad. And she canned Brunswick stew and shipped to me over there. And We were fortunate with that. I remember that time when we were moving out to go up to push the Bulge back. We got our first mail from home, and I got a fruitcake from my aunt, and the officers got 2 bottles of whiskey a month. I mean, they had a fifth of gin and a fifth of bourbon, and our lieutenant was a teetotaler, so he had gotten his liquor ration and he gave it to us. We were in this truck, so I passed my fruitcake around, and then they passed that bourbon around, so we enjoyed that going up to the Bulge. And of course, that was a real experience up there. One of the towns that the only real sizable town that my company got into was St. Hubert, Belgium, and it was we took this town at night. We had to struggle through snow and all that. It was really a rough situation, but the Germans moved out the next day, and we didn't have any problem. And so we were resting, and glad to be out of the combat and having a nice town to relax in. And somebody from the Signal Corps came in and said they wanted us to put our equipment back on. They wanted to take pictures of us taking the town. And we told them nothing doing. We weren't about to do that. But they went and talked to our company commander, and so we got orders to do it. So we had to retake that town for the benefit of the cameras. And but we stayed in that town for about a week, and it was real nice. The first time we had a good place like that to stay and all. And the Belgians were very friendly, and we enjoyed it quite a bit. But then we had to move out and continue the war. That was in that area. That's around St. Vith. St. Vith was completely wiped out from artillery fires back and forth from the Americans to the Germans. And then we began to move on back towards Germany, and we seemed like we marched from Belgium through Luxembourg all the way to Germany. And so then my unit crossed the Moselle River, which is at a point where it almost runs into the Rhine River. And that was a very sticky situation. There's pictures of that in here. There's a steep bank on both sides of that river. So my unit was taking the lead going in, and we went. We didn't carry a lot of heavy arms because we anticipated the Germans would open up on us, and we'd be out there in the water with a lot of heavy equipment. So we went over very lightly in light boats, and we got on the other side, and without an instant the Germans didn't fire on us. Then a group was coming behind us with the heavy equipment, and they came in bigger boats and all that, and the Germans were waiting for them, and they opened up on them, and they went down. A lot of them drowned because they were carrying heavy equipment and they couldn't maneuver. But my unit held that beachhead for a while till they could get more equipment across there, and then we had to fight up that hill. And when we got up to the top of that hill, it was about nighttime, and the fighting had slowed down, and we were told that we would be taking it easy for a while, and so we took over a house, and my unit did, and so we were enjoying that. They said we wouldn't pull out until the next morning, and this was in Germany, and of course we had been through France, and the Germans had just looted France, and we go into French house, and everything was just looted. Nothing was there. But in this German house that we were staying in, we found a wine cellar down there, and so we were enjoying this booze and living it up. And then all of a sudden the orders came in that things have changed, that we were moving out. And so we moved out, and fortunately my unit, my company was in reserve, and the two companies went down the hill with the in the middle of the fighting, and we were up on top of the hill, and I remember it was drizzling rain, and I was under a raincoat with a buddy of mine, and you could hear the shells popping over your head as it went by. And he says, look up and see where they're firing from. And I said, I looked up and I said, they're firing from everywhere. And he said, well, pull that raincoat back down, thinking that would protect him, you know. So we spent the night on that hill. Fortunately, we didn't get hurt up there. And then the next day is when we went down the hill, and that was the Rhine River, and that's where I got wounded.
Okay. Did you have other friends and family members that were also in the war at the time, or?
Not any immediate family members. I had an older brother who had 2 children, and he didn't go in. I had a younger brother that went in the Navy, and the war was over by the time he finished boot camp. And in fact, he enlisted in the Navy. I mean, he dropped out of high school to get in the Navy because he's afraid the war was going to be over before he got in there. And it was over by the time he finished his boot camp training. And he was assigned to aircraft carrier, and all they did was to haul troops. They had to go over and pick up the troops and bring them back. So he didn't get in any fighting. I had some cousins that were in the Navy in the Pacific. I didn't know much about what they were doing and all that, but I didn't have any real close family members there.
We talked about the communication that it sounds like the Army's communication was a little bit slower than your own mail getting over there. Now, once you came back here and you were back in Atlanta on your leave, when were you officially discharged? Or did you say the reserves?
Okay.
Or?
All right, let's see, we got back. Well, the Japanese surrender was in August, and that's when we landed. So then I had a 30-day furlough from that. And after that furlough, they had to do something with us, and so I was assigned to a unit in Fort Oglethorpe, which is up near Chattanooga. And they just had to find something for us to do until the time to be discharged. You had to accumulate points. And when I first went in, first drafted, they asked if you could type, and I could, and I passed a typing test, and I was given a rating as a clerk typist, but I never used it in the Army. But until I was getting ready to get out. So when they assigned me to this hospital unit, if they saw where I had been a clerk, I could be a clerk typist. So I spent the time typing medical discharges until I accumulated enough points to get out. So that was in November, I think, when I was actually discharged. And so I just killed time, you might say, up there until that period.
And then came back to Atlanta?
Yeah, and then I went back to college.
At Georgia? Or?
Yeah, well, I went to it was a separate school then, what's now Georgia State. It was it was not a separate school. It was part of the University of Georgia. It was called the Atlanta Division of the University of Georgia. So I went there for a quarter, and then I went over to Athens and got back into it. And of course, I got in with the returning veterans that we were all in the same boat. We were wearing our Army uniforms, dyed and that sort of thing, and we were all struggling to get along. So and everybody was just anxious to get out of school, and it wasn't like your normal college group because everybody was serious and wanted to finish up this and get on with their lives because they had matured. I had matured a lot in that length of time. I probably never would have finished school or college if I hadn't gone through that because, see, it was right at the end of the Depression, and I was having to work my way through college. And going back, it was with the GI Bill, and the combination of the GI Bill and a part-time job, I was able to make it all right.
Now, when you first went in, you were pursuing the military type program, so did you completely change paths when you went back in terms of your studies or what you wanted to do?
Oh no, I went back and continued what I had planned to do, which was to get a degree in accounting.
Oh, okay.
This specialized training thing that I was telling you about, that was a way of getting some college time while you were in service.
I see.
And it just didn't work out for me. The timing was wrong on that. But a lot of people got a lot of college credit while they were in service.
Now, what about in the years that have followed, are you involved with going to reunions or staying in touch with many of the people that
No, it seems like our division, it's really wasn't anybody that pulled it together and all. That division had been a training division. It wasn't an old line unit like the 2nd Cavalry or something like that. And so people had come and gone through that unit even before they went overseas. It was a training unit. So you really didn't have anybody that had been in the division for a long time, so there was nothing was really built up on it.
And did you ever go back at any point? Have you been back since?
No, I would like to have seen some of this area that I had been to, but I never got over there.
Okay. Now, what I'd like to do, I think, is if we could get you to, I don't know, if it take 2 hours to hold up some of the pictures. I want to try and focus in here on.
I was reading over. I got a lot of clippings that I have gotten over the years. This was a series of. It was in Atlanta papers about World War II, 50 years later, and I was reading something about the Belgian Bulge, and they were saying that we had over 80,000 casualties there in that Bulge. And it was the biggest battle that the Americans had been in since Gettysburg, I think.
Get that off the microphone. There we go. Don't want to miss anything. Okay.
Let's see if I can. Now these are some of the pictures. Showing the conditions now. Can you focus on that?
Okay.
All right. This is a picture of a couple of soldiers stopping to eat. They're on their way to St. Hubert. That was a town I was telling you about. And you see how heavy the snow and all was there. We had to battle through all of that to take the town of St. Hubert. And then this just shows some scenes of the snow and all and out there. That's just GIs lounging around. These are some of the battle plans of shows some of the activities of where we were fighting. That's
Was that you actually followed that one there on the left?
What about it?
Was that the one you followed?
Oh no, that happens to be another unit. It's not mine. Let me see if this. No, that's it's another battalion. It's not my battalion. These are just some pictures of the GIs out there. It doesn't show much snow there, but it was awful cold at that point. Can you hold that up?
Sleeping in a foxhole with the
Hold this up here.
snow over the top of it.
Yeah, I'll do that. This is where we went through the Siegfried line with those dragon teeth, you know. All right, here's another picture of the Siegfried line. That's where we first went into Germany. And this is, that's the, where we crossed the Moselle River that I was telling you about before. And the tanks have finally gotten across. I thought, yeah, here's some of the boats that I was telling you about that they went across on. See, guys had all this heavy equipment, and the boats were sunk, and a lot of them were drowned because they couldn't swim with all that equipment. And then after we got across, we began putting a bridge together, and then you could bring the heavy equipment across on this bridge. The engineers would come up and put that bridge together.
Yeah, pontoon bridge.
Yeah. There's another place where we had to battle up a hill. But that's what most of this is about various pictures like that. Of course, it's...
What's on the right there? Which, what's the location?
Oh, that's, let's see. That's Poland, Germany, and that shows what happens in a lot of those towns. See, the artillery had been blasting through there, both the Germans shooting towards us and us shooting towards the Germans, so it just about wiped that town out. I thought maybe that was St. Vith. They have a picture here of St. Vith, which was just completely obliterated. Let me see if I can find it. There's a picture of eating out in the field. Oh, St. Vith is back the other way. Yeah, here's the ruins of St. Vith. That was a pretty good sized town, but as you can see, there's not a house standing. I remember one of the Belgians I talked to had told me about going through St. Vith. He said there's not one brick standing on top of the other. Said they're all completely liberated. I can't stand up too long. I get a pain in the back.
Now, were there some other? I know these clippings were from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution,
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
And that was on a. When did that series run?
That was in 1995. See, this was 50 years after the war.
Okay.
And this particular one here is about Patton, and it tells a lot about the Bulge. Patton said that since January, the Third Army has wrestled 6,484 square miles from the enemy, captured 140,000, or wounded an additional 99,000. History records no greater achievement history records no greater achievement in so limited a time. The defending Germans flee in panic in front of the armored forces of Patton and the First Army commanded by Lieutenant General Hodges, whose GIs were the first Americans to cross the Rhine. The two U.S. armies streak across the open plains of Middle Germany, gobbling up Nazi industrial centers as they go. the retreat becomes a rout. The Nazi troops cannot turn tail and run fast enough. German roads leading to Munich and Nuremberg are clogged with fleeing civilians. Thousands of Nazi troops rush to the American lines to be captured. In other words, they are wanting to be captured by the Americans. A jubilant General Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, says the main German defense line has been broken and that as a military force on the Western Front, they are a whipped army. There will be no negotiated unconditional surrender, but an imposed unconditional surrender. I was trying to pick out something there. In the American press, General Marshall complained there was an overdose of Montgomery. They're talking about British General Montgomery. They gave him a lot more credit than they did the Americans. It says, on March the 23rd, Ike telephoned and directed that I hold a press conference to emphasize American achievement. Both General Hodges and General Patton had crossed the Rhine before Montgomery's grandiose Operation Plunder scheduled to go the following day. Montgomery's massive assault across the Rhine is launched at 1 a.m. March the 24th. Among the more than 250,000 troops at his command are the Western British and Canadians. But the press had given Montgomery a lot more credit for crossing the Rhine than and he wasn't the first one to cross, and the Americans were already across. Patton's warriors seized the German city of Frankfurt on March 26 and cut the Stuttgart-Hanover highway. The First Army drives into Limburg and clears it quickly. That's what that's generally about. And then there's a story here about a bridge leading across the Rhine that the Germans were desperately trying to blow up, and it wouldn't blow up. They set a lot of charges on it, and it never did fall. And so the Americans were able to use that bridge to cross. That's the way they were able to get across in there. That's real interesting to go back and read this, but it...
That looks like it was a really good series.
Uh-huh.
Now, did you have any other clippings or things in the book that, or things that...
I don't think so. These is divided by regiments, so it's, well, I can show you a picture of my company. I can find it. Right. A right interesting thing. I was home on that 30-day furlough I was telling you about, and I wasn't in my original unit. I was in this had been assigned to the General Hospital unit. But my unit had been sent back to the States, and they were stationed down at Fort Benning. And I happened to run into some of them in a nightclub in Atlanta. And in fact, some of them right from my company. And so they was telling me about being down at Fort Benning and invited me to come down there. So I went down there the next day, and I just happened to be there when they took a picture of the company. And although I was no longer a member of that company, I got my picture taken with them. That's me right there.
Can you tilt it up maybe a little there?
So
Okay.
that's what the whole company looks like. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And also, I'd like to reference the book itself on the tape. I know, I don't know if there's it's just, this is called the, the title page there. Okay.
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 See, it says here, this book is respectfully dedicated to the officers and men of the 87th Infantry Division who gave their lives so that we might live. I thought maybe it would say who produced it, but it doesn't.
We're about the 5-minute mark, and just going to see, do you have anything, anything else in particular you'd like to add, or that throw in as we wrap things up that you thought about that you forgot to say earlier? Or
I remember a story you used to tell about at the Bulge, the way you used to have to sleep in the foxhole with the shelter half over the top and the snow down on top. The snow actually insulated you and kept you warm.
Yeah, when we moved up for the Bulge, we got into the first snow. Me and a buddy built a real good foxhole, and we had built a fire. It was real cold during the daytime, and we had built a fire down in there. And as it came on close to night, of course we had to put the fire out, and there was warm ashes there, and we put a shelter half over those ashes, and we laced the top of the foxhole with logs. Generally we did that in case artillery shell came in and exploded in the air. It wouldn't rain shrapnel down on us. So that made a top for this, and I put a shelter half down on that to kind of seal it in. So we were down in that hole with the warm ashes, and it snowed and completely covered all of that over with snow. And I was called out about 3 o'clock in the morning to go on guard duty, and I had to come out of that nice warm hole into that cold air. But I always said that was the nicest foxhole I'd ever built, and I couldn't stay there very long. And then the next day we had to move out to keep pushing that Bulge back.
leave that behind.
Yeah, and we saw lots and lots of German equipment as we pushed them back, trucks and tanks that had been bombed and all that. It was and horses. See, the Germans didn't have much gasoline, so they used horses to pull a lot of their guns and all that sort of stuff. And we'd see dead horses laying around and all that. And we would occasionally see dead Germans. But the Americans always tried to keep the dead Americans cleaned up because they didn't want us to see dead Americans. And they have a unit called the Grave Registration Group that go around and pick up the dead American soldiers as fast as they come. I remember one time I happened to run into a place where they were accumulating the dead American soldiers, and there must have been 50 of them that were just stacked up there, and they usually keep that hidden from the soldiers, but I happened to run into it, and that's a sickening feeling to see your own men lined up like that. We got used to seeing dead Germans and didn't think much about it much. If you got a couple of minutes, I can give you one.
Yeah, actually we do. We're fine.
All right.
We got a little bit of leeway to go over here.
I had one time when I had been evacuated for a short time because I had a cold. My temperature was over 100. And when I came back up to the lines, I was snuggling down, and we were in the Maginot Line, and there were places to sleep and all that. And I had bedded down there, and somebody came in looking for me, and they said, somebody said Sergeant Alexander's back. And they said, yeah, he's around here somewhere. And I just snuggled down. I didn't want them to pull me out because I'd been out of combat for about a week, and I wasn't ready to go back. He said, the lieutenant wants him to take a patrol out. So he found me, and they dug me out, and I had to take a patrol out that night. And our job was to go across to the German, up in the German lines and contact a unit on our right, which was not part of our division. It was another division. And so we made the contact, and they had had breakfast in the dark, and they had pancakes. We'd always try to get our cooks to cook pancakes, and they said they couldn't keep them. So they have them in these what we call Marmite cans. They were big things about that big, and they were laying around. So it had gotten daylight. They didn't tell us that the German mortars were up on the hill up there. So we got out there and was helping ourselves to pancakes when all of a sudden the mortars broke out. And I remember one looked like a mortar went right into one of those pans and scattered pancakes. So, and we had to run and get out of that. In fact, I saw one guy, I was running right beside him that looked like he had I could tell that he was dead before he hit the ground, because but we were enjoying those pancakes.